Assalamu alaikum, third year. Now, in continuation of our discussion regarding the drugs acting on endocrinology, our next topic is the drugs used in the treatment of diabetes mellitus. And because mainly there are two types of groups, one is insulins and others are orally used anti-diabetic drugs. So, in the first aspect or first part, we are going to discuss the role of insulins in the diabetes mellitus. As usually, we have divided again for your convenience into two parts. Today we will discuss the first part, and in the first part actually we will go through briefly the different types of diabetes mellitus, a normal control of blood sugar level, and then we will see the insulin normally physiologically, because all these discussions are very important to understand the pharmacological aspect of insulin. Now, first of all, diabetes mellitus. What is diabetes mellitus? Remember, basically it's a metabolic disorder of the metabolism. Kinka? Mainly of carbohydrate and protein. And due to this metabolic disorder of carbohydrate protein, the main common feature is hyperglycemia, increased blood sugar level. Hyperglycemia is the main key feature of this metabolic disorder. Normal blood sugar level is usually about 100 milligram percent, while in case of diabetes mellitus, if the renal threshold is about 180 milligram, above that obviously glucose starts appear into the urine. As far as the fasting is concerned, normal is up to 120 milligram percent. If it is more than that, usually accordingly we labelize what type of diabetes, mild, moderate, severe, and obviously other types we will discuss later on. And the post meal, usually the blood sugar level may rise up to 200 milligram percent. With this normal references, we must know that diabetes usually due to either inadequate insulin secretion or there is development of insulin resistance, or both. Both the deficiency of insulin is there in decreased secretion or insulin resistance. As far as the types of diabetes mellitus are concerned, the first most important one is a type 1. Type 1 diabetes, we also call it as a juvenile. Here actually usually the cause is either idiopathic, no known cause is there, or there may be some immunological reaction due to which there is absolute insulin deficiency. There is no insulin production within the body. So obviously, to make up that deficiency, these patients always throughout their life are dependent on insulin from outside. There may be polyuria, polydipsia mainly, and weight loss. And usually here, all these symptoms are associated with the random plasma glucose level more than usually or up to 200 milligram per deciliter. Plasma glucose level is usually about or more than 126 milligram per deciliter after overnight fasting. More than one occasion, if it is present, we labelize it as diabetes, and if it is due to absolute deficiency, we will call it as type 1 in adult, usually juvenile type. In these patients, there may be ketonemia, presence of ketone bodies in the blood, and ketonuria, appearance of ketone bodies in the urine, or there may be both. Okay, they are both present in the blood and appearance in the urine also. Usually some antibodies are frequently seen and present in the islets of Langerhans of the pancreas. As far as the type 2 is concerned, other name is maturity onset, as the name it is indicating. Usually this type of diabetes appearing about roughly at the age of 40 plus. Here usually resistance to insulin is there, or abnormality in the structure and the function of insulin molecule is there. There may be dysfunction in the beta cells of Langerhans and insulin deficiency there. As I told you, majority of the patients are usually above 40 years of age and they are usually obese in nature, obviously with polyuria polydipsia. Here again, plasma glucose level at more than one occasion after overnight fasting, if it is about or more than 126 milligram per deciliter, we will labelize it as diabetes mellitus. Glucose tolerance test done after 2 hours after 75 milligram oral glucose. Usually if the glucose levels are more than 200 milligram per deciliter, that is usually indication of this diabetes mellitus. As far as the hemoglobin A1C type, usually their levels are about or more than 6.5%. That will indicate the control of glucose level of the previous weeks. These patients, type 2 diabetic patient, may be associated with the hypertension, dyslipidemia, and obviously atherosclerosis also. So these patients, after years and years, they develop changes in the blood vessel in the form of atherosclerosis. As far as the ketonuria or weight loss is concerned, usually they are not commonly observed during type 2 diabetes at the time of diagnosis. However, if the type 2 diabetic patient are having high blood sugar level in emergency, then yes, ketonuria may also be, and weight loss will start also. We have seen a few of the female, the initial manifestation is just candida vaginitis, inflammation of vagina due to presence of a fungal infection, candida albicans. This may be the only initial manifestation, and then later on, after investigation, that is proved that they are suffering from type 2 diabetes mellitus. There are so many patients, even either they may have only few or no symptom at all, no polyuria, no polydipsia, no other symptom at all. At random, just they are diagnosed as a patient suffering from type 2 diabetes mellitus. There is another thing we have seen, about 25% of the general non-obese, apparently non-diabetic patient, but they have insulin resistance, just like as we are seen in type 2 diabetes mellitus. Such patients are known as insulin resistance syndrome patient or metabolic syndrome patient. These patients are usually at much higher risk of developing this type 2 diabetes mellitus than insulin sensitive persons. In such patients, there is too much increased risk of atherosclerotic disease. There may be increased plasma triglyceride level, increased low density lipoproteins, decreased high density lipoproteins. They are hypertensive. Usually they may be hyperuricemia, abdominal obesity, what we call central obesity, they may be there. There may be prothrombotic state also. That will be indicated as there will be increased level of plasminogen activated inhibitor type 1, as P8 type 1, or there may be pro-inflammatory states also. So all these are associated with the insulin resistance syndrome or metabolic syndrome. Type 3, usually they are non-pancreatic in origin. Usually they may be drug induced, constant intake of steroids or constant stimulation of sympathetic system due to sympathomimetic drug, etc., or other hormonal intake. So drug induced diabetes mellitus. Type 4, gestational, during pregnancy. Here usually insulin resistance is observed. There may be some specific single gene disorder, although it's very rare, but there may be some gene disorder, single gene disorder, and that lead to produce diabetes mellitus in some specific patient. There may be some other specific causes also. There may be some disease of the pancreas itself leading to develop the diabetes mellitus, or there may be surgical partial or complete removal of the pancreatic part lead to deficiency of insulin and obviously then development of diabetes mellitus. Or there may be some disease like Cushing syndrome. Now, some physiological aspect, regulatory hormones. Diagrammatically, we see from intestine, amino acid, fatty acid, glucose are being absorbed and coming into the blood. They are having effects on the beta cell diagram of the pancreas and leading to increased insulin secretion. There may be some other GIT hormones also, incretin, etc. They are also stimulating and increasing insulin release. Some other glucagon-like subjects, etc., or pancreatic parasympathetic nerve system on the muscarinic receptor, they may also increase the release. While sympathetic through alpha-2 receptor or even adrenaline through alpha-2 receptor will inhibit the beta cell and will decrease insulin. Similarly, somatostatin, etc., or some other factors are also which may inhibit the beta cell activity and decrease insulin secretion, and that will lead to produce diabetes mellitus. Sulfonylureas, we will see one of the orally used anti-diabetic drugs. They also have stimulatory effects on beta cells and they will increase the secretion or release of insulin. Due to that reason, we call such group as secretagogues, increasing the secretion of insulin. So, sulfonylureas is one of the secretagogues. Glucose transporters. There are a variety of transporters present in the blood responsible for the glucose transport in the different parts. For example, transporter GLUT1. We are symbolizing them and calling them as GLUT1, 2, 3, 4, 5 like that. So, GLUT1 present in the brain. So, basically they are responsible for the basal uptake of glucose in the brain and the transport across the blood-brain barrier. But for here, apart from other, you will go through, but we are mainly concerned with the GLUT2, which are present in the beta cells of pancreas, and they are responsible for the regulation of the insulin release. Some insulin release is controlled by different factors like by glucose or by some drugs like sulfonylurea we have just seen at the level of pancreatic beta cell. Diagrammatically, glucose is transported through the glucose transporter GLUT2 we have seen here in the last table. So, when the increased glucose levels are reaching inside the cells, obviously of the beta cell of the pancreas, so after metabolism there will be increased formation of ATP. That increased ATP will affect the potassium channel and will lead to closure of the potassium channel. When the potassium channel closes, this cell is depolarized, cell of the beta cell is depolarized. Due to depolarization, then there is opening of the calcium channel. When there is opening of the potassium channel due to this depolarization, increased calcium will come inside the cell, and this increased calcium will go to the store of the insulin granules. From there, through exocytosis, insulin release will occur. So, this is the one way by which glucose will lead to increased insulin release. Similarly, above we have seen sulfonylureas. They also lead to close the potassium channel. They block actually. So, by blocking the potassium channel, so obviously again they will lead to produce depolarization, and then through depolarization, calcium channel will open, increased calcium coming inside through exocytosis will lead to insulin release. So these are the two mechanisms by which glucose and sulfonylureas are increasing the insulin release. This is just now description of how glucose and how sulfonylureas are producing insulin release. Now let's discuss with insulin. First, the proinsulin, structure of a proinsulin. So basically, proinsulin is consisting of three chains: A, B, and C peptide. A chain, B chain, and C peptide. All are, especially A chain is interlinked with the disulfide bond itself, and A and beta both are also bound with the disulfide bond. However, C peptide is for the time being also as a part of this proinsulin molecule. In the body, then the proinsulin is hydrolyzed into insulin itself and obviously C peptide also. As far as the proinsulin is concerned, when proinsulin is hydrolyzed, it is secreted into equivalent amount. Equal number of molecules will be present of both insulin and C peptides. Itself, proinsulin is having very mild hypoglycemic action, while obviously we know insulin is very strong hypoglycemic effect. But as far as the proinsulin is concerned, very mild hypoglycemic action. After hydrolysis, when C peptide up till now has no known physiological function. Now, insulin structure, obviously C peptide is absent. Otherwise, both the A and B are alpha or beta chains, both they are present. 21 molecules are present in alpha chain, A chain, and 30 molecules are present in the B or beta chain. So total 51 amino acids are there. Another thing, there is specific sequence of amino acids. If at number 1 glycine present, always will be number 1 glycine. Similarly, in the beta chain, lastly at the position 30, 3 threonine present, yes, 3 threonine. At 29, lysine. So sequence of amino acid very, very important, because it will differ from species to species. And the molecular weight of insulin structure is 5808. As I told you, chain alpha, beta, or alpha, A chain or beta chain, disulfide bond itself, and with the other chain also, like this. Remember, when insulin is synthesized in the beta cells, and they are stored in the form of crystals in the granules of beta cells, and these crystals are consisting of 2 atoms of zinc and 6 molecules of insulin. So that is why they are also known as hexamer, 6 molecules of insulin with 2 atoms of zinc. In this form, this crystal is stored in the granules of the beta cells. Insulin receptors are present in the body, specified insulin receptors, especially on different target tissue on which insulin is acting, in the liver, skeletal muscle, adipose tissue, etc., etc. So insulin usually, by binding these receptors, promote the storage of glucose and fat within the target cells. For example, signaling by insulin, how it occur up till the time when there is no binding of insulin molecule or any agonist on the receptor present, they are present separately, individually, monomeric state, one state. This is inactive. When they are bound with the agonist, like insulin molecule, they close together and they are present now in the state of dimeric state. Now this is active. When they become active, there is phosphorylation of the receptor occur, and enzyme is activated here as indicated with the arrow. After phosphorylation of the receptor, then phosphorylation substrate also present, also occur, leading to produce some chemical changes. Now, classification of the insulins. Up till now, insulin availables are as such. For example, first group is rapid and ultra short acting. They are acting rapidly and only for short period, up to 3 to 5 hours only. Both injectable and non-injectable. Injectable, insulin Lispro, insulin Aspart, insulin Glulisine. These are the three injectables now available. Are inhaled form. This is usually prepared to convert inhaled human insulin, DNA technology. Second is short acting insulin. Usually duration of action of 5 to 8 hours. It includes regular insulin, which is whatever, when the name is indicated as insulin, we usually means regular insulin. It is both of human origin and animal origin, or insulin, second type. Third is intermediate acting. Here duration of action 4 to 12 hours. NPH, that's neutral protamine, Agdon, or isophene insulin, lent insulin. Again, this is human and novo type, both types. Fourth one is long acting insulin. Here the duration of action from 11 to 24 hours. 4 types up till now we have seen. Ultra lent insulin. This is usually extended zinc insulin. Or other 3 are insulin glargine, insulin determer, insulin deglutec. Usually, especially determine and deglutec, all are having duration of action more than 24 hours. Then we have mixed preparations also. These are usually mixture of intermediate and rapidly acting insulin or regular insulin, etc., etc. Different ratio combinations, 70-30, 50-50, 75-25. For example, 70-30 means 70 part a unit is NPH and 30 is of regular insulin, like that. There may be neutral protamine, Lispro, or neutral protamine, Aspart, depending upon the ultra short acting Lispro is present or Aspart is present. Accordingly, we are naming them and abbreviations are used. Now, let's have a discussion on short acting insulin, which is mainly regular insulin, what we call it. As we are saying it again and again, regular insulin is a short acting. It is soluble, crystalline, zinc insulin, identical to human insulin. Effects usually starts within 30 minutes. Peak effects are seen within 2 to 3 hours after subcutaneous injection. Obviously, after intravenous injection, immediately we will see the effects. This peak effect and 30 minutes is associated with the subcutaneous injection. So this much time will be taken for the absorption and onset of action. And this effect usually lasts for 8 hours. Diagrammatically, as arrow is indicated, regular insulin. This much after time, we will get the peak of level of insulin, regular insulin, and duration usually up to 8 hours, but if we see on technical ground, it may lead up to 12 hours, but effective levels up to 8 hours are usually getting from 5 to 8 hours. This is structure of regular insulin, disulfide bond like that, alpha chain, beta chain, as we have seen before, 51 amino acid in the specific sequence. Here, glycine and proline. Normally, this proline is present at the B28, glycine at the B23. Both are showing a normal interaction with each other. This is very much important, this interaction of glycine, which is present B at the level of 23, beta chain, B stands for beta chain, and proline at the B28 means beta chain at the sequence of 28. This is important for the self-aggregation of the insulin itself. This is the normal interaction. If we are using in high concentration of, or if they are present large volume of fluid, this insulin, regular insulin, as present in the vials, regular insulin molecule self aggregate and they are present in the form of dimer itself. They stabilize, this molecule stabilize around the zinc ions and to create insulin hexamers, as we have seen, as they are present in the beta cell. Similarly, in the large volume, in the in the injection large size vials, they also start present in the form of hexamer. When we inject it, this hexameric nature of the regular insulin lead to delayed onset of action, prolong the time to get peak action. Actually, the problem arises after subsequent injection, this delayed absorption due to presence of hexamer, because now the size of the molecule is large. Instead of separate molecules, they are now present in the form of hexamer. So due to large size molecule, the absorption is delayed. But if the patient is taking food, there will be mismatching of the level of insulin according to the requirement after the food intake. As I am saying, after subcutaneous injection, the large size hexamer molecules, they are transported across the vascular endothelium into the blood stream very slowly. First of all, these insulin large size molecules, they are diluted by the interstitial fluid present subcutaneously, and gradually the concentration begins to fall, and these hexamers get broken down into first dimers and then dimers into monomers. So what we see, when we are using the injection from the large size, obviously they are available in the large size vials, so they will be present in the form of hexamer, and when we inject them, we see three types of rates of absorption. First, initial will be through hexamers, because yet they have not been converted into di and monomers, so they will show slow absorption, delayed and slow effect. When gradually dilution occurs due to the interstitial fluid, dimer will form, and dimer will however show comparatively faster effect than the hexamers. However, later on, when these dimer will be converted into monomers, obviously this will be the fastest effects. So usually we get a mixture of effects of all these three states of molecules present in the fluid. Now, if regular insulin is administered just before the meal time, so obviously it will take time to get the peak effects. About 2-3 hours it will take for the peak effects. While on the other hand, if the patient has taken meal, the blood glucose will rise much earlier. So what we call is early postprandial hyperglycemia will occur. And when insulin effect will start late and remain for longer period, up to 5 to 8 hours, there will be a risk of late postprandial hypoglycemia. I will explain it. Okay, what happened? Patient has taken meal, within half to 1 hour, the glucose level will reach to its highest level. But the onset of regular insulin will start about after 2 to 3 hours, peak effect will be seen. And when the effects will start, it will start lowering the glucose level. And this effect will remain up till 5 to 8 hours. By the time the post meal rise of glucose has already come down, but the effect of insulin is still there. So what will happen? Now there will be hypoglycemia which will occur after about this much time. Okay, initially when the requirement was there, insulin was not present there. And when insulin comes, after about 2 to 3 hours, obviously it will lower the blood glucose raised level to the normal and it will go down. But the effect of insulin is still there. It will produce hypoglycemia, what we call as late postprandial post-meal. Postprandial means post-meal, postprandial hypoglycemia. So what we do, regular insulin should be injected at least 30 to 45 minutes before the meal to minimize this mismatching. So now usually, because we have given about an hour about before the meal, and then we will see the onset of action and the rise of post-meal glucose are matching each other. The only problem here is that usually patient may forget to take meal. Okay, patient has taken the injection about half hour to 45 minutes before the meal, and due to any reason, some typhoon has come, some other problem is there in which the patient has been involved and has gotten his meal, but the insulin has gone inside, it will produce severe hypoglycemia. So that is the main problem with this time before which we are injecting this. Ideally, regular insulin should be administered intravenously, but as a routine we can't give or take injection as a routine intravenously daily, 1 or twice or thrice times a day. So intravenous route is only used for emergency. That is the reason we have to be dependent on the subcutaneous injection, subcutaneous route of administration, and that is facing the problem of hexameric insulin, and it will take the time to dissociate into monomers. So this problem is there. So as I told you, it is practically useful for IV therapy, the management of only emergency, for example in diabetic ketoacidosis or after surgery or during severe acute infection, because in all these conditions there is very much raised blood sugar level. Acute emergency is there.